All right, John, here's some Brock Purdy numbers. Since he took over week 14, since becoming the starter, this is where he ranks the NFL according to NFL and CBS. First in passer rating, first in touchdowns, first in touchdowns per attempt. 9% of his attempts are touchdowns. First in passing yards per attempt, 8.85, and tied for first in wins.
Yeah, I mean, he's been...
And that doesn't count the Dolphins game.
It went from flash in the pan to a month later, like this, everything we saw was real. And the only question is now, if he keeps playing like this, I think they win the NFC. I think it takes him playing really shitty or a game where they fumble it several times and the defense is bad.
Yeah.
And in fairness, the defense has shown the last couple of weeks has not been, I would say, their, shining moment of the season. But I thought Kyle summed it up pretty well because I think Eric Branch, our buddy, asked him, do you approach Brock a little bit different than you would necessarily with Jimmy in playoff games, given that Jimmy had been through the situation and had been taught as a backup to become a starter? He had seen a lot of different experiences with a rookie quarterback. And Kyle's like, no, man, our week's kind of our week, right? Like, we do first down on Wednesday. It's a shorter week this week, but we do first and second down, then we do third down, then we do red zone. And every week in the NFL's a big deal. And you start thinking about it, and you taught me this a long time ago when you try to get fired up on baseball, which does not work on the West Coast. It kind of works in the Northeast. Like, a game in June does not matter. And honestly, the NBA is the same thing.
Radio show topics back in the day.
And even though we probably should have done this is must win, it would have been more fun. But no one actually cares, especially when it was talking about Sonny Gray and the A's. But
those were fun topics.
But you wouldn't do it. You said this is a must-win game. It's like game 67.
No, you're right.
In basketball, it's the same thing. In football, every game matters. It just does. Now, does it determine your season or not? No. But after a football game, when you lose it, it is devastating. It's why it by far is the number one, what we do for a living, the number one topic is football games and reacting to them. Because there's nothing fake about when something happens. And especially in the NFL. So these last 5 weeks where he's prepared to be the starter, they've all mattered. And even once they won the division that Thursday night in Seattle, they had to keep winning. It kind of, it opened up when Jalen got hurt, the number one seed. But definitely with Minnesota, it was God, they could get the 2 seed. So they were in this unique position where they clinched the playoff position and they had that Y next to their name, but they could increase their seeding. And what happened? They did. They did. When he first came in, they were not going to have multiple home games in the playoffs, right?
They were 7-4 when he took over, right? A half.
And I think the Vikings had one loss at the time for sure.
But also I think they were a half game ahead of Seattle, right? When he took over the Dolphins. That going week 13 when he took over, going into that Dolphins game, that was a big game because Miami was good. And Seattle was right on the 49ers' heels. And it was well, you lose, they win, they beat you at home at the end of the year on a Thursday night. It's a short week. You're coming off the Bucs game. What happens against the Bucs? I think you're right? It's easy in hindsight to say he hasn't played in a big pressure spot yet, or at least he certainly hasn't played in a playoff game.
Was it Miami, Tampa, Seattle? Was that the...
Yeah.
Gotcha.
How about being just the last pick of the draft who has to take over a team that everyone just looks at and says, hey, man, just come in here and drive this car. Don't crash the car and we'll be fine, right? Which I guess in theory sounds like there's not a lot of pressure there, but I think there's quite a bit of pressure when you jump into, it'd be like Lewis Hamilton has a big lead, a big lead with 15 laps to go. Hey, kid, just come hold this lead. It's well, cool that I'm in Lewis Hamilton's car with the lead and Lewis had to go to the bathroom, whatever he had to leave, got hurt. But if you don't land that plane, that's on you because everything was working without you, right? And that's pressure. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, Pete Carroll's listen, they obviously have a lot of sweet players. He's been a fantastic point guard, but you also have to go out and do it, right? It's easy to be well, they got 17 players to throw it to. Well, can you do it? Because Jimmy was hit or miss doing it. He'd been in the league for 8 years, and got a $100 million contract once upon a time. So it's
Trey,
like,
there was some question. I mean,
fuck you. Yeah.
you know,
His own teammates question.
I don't want to relitigate it, but we've been down that road before.
I did see someone in the chat, and they bring up a good point. The weather this weekend could be a factor. And that is something that he hasn't really played in, a crazy weather game. This is where, though, it benefits. He did play college football in a place with not great weather, right? So this gets back to Kaepernick. When he went up to Green Bay, Kaepernick played at Reno. So despite being a kid from the Valley, where it's fucking hot as shit most of the year, he played at a place. I remember going up there as a GA at Fresno State. It was freezing, like November 1. Now it's probably like 40 degrees, but I remember being so cold. But it's not just the games.
40 there.
Fuck yeah. And what else do you do? Football teams, like, you train once the season ends in January and February to spring ball, like lifting outside. Like, he spent 4 years in a very, very cold place. Obviously played some cold weather games, but just think about spring ball, think about training. Like, he is used to not beautiful weather at Ames, Iowa, or Iowa City, or wherever the hell Iowa State is.
Ames is Iowa State.
Yeah, so that's when I think the state of Iowa, that's state, correct?
Right.
I think 6 months of the year, tough weather, like November to probably early April. Like, it's not. I wouldn't call it the Florida Keys, you know. That feels just like when he's throwing balls in February, getting ready for spring ball. It is not beautiful outside. I would guess they have an indoor facility, but to me, it just. I like guys that are accustomed to the weather.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't ideal. Last year, they hosted TCU. It was 42 degrees. They beat them 48-14. Brock was 21 of 30, 262, 2 touchdowns, no picks.
No, it's not. It's not freezing cold there. To me, it's more about I would rather have a 30-degree game than just a slop. That neutralizes everything.
Yeah, and I bet we could find a few of those games. Here's a 63. I bet we could find a few of those games. But the good news is this is not Aaron Rodgers on the other side. This is not the good Russell Wilson team on the other side. We know what the recipe is for a Kyle Shanahan team. The recipe to win is pretty straightforward. The recipe to lose is also straightforward. The recipe to lose is they turn it over. That's the recipe to lose.
Kyle and Pete both said that. The number one thing, turnovers. It's playoff football.
And I would argue this, turnovers in the wrong spot. Pick sixes and turnovers in your own territory. Picks at the other 30. If you told me Brock throws 3 interceptions, but they're all between the plus, 35 and 25, that would be devastating. But I would just about guarantee that doesn't turn into 21 points. Maybe turns into 10. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just picks, it's turnovers, it's where they happen. Is it a Ray? Is it a Did you see where Kyle said about Ray? Leads the league in mumbles. I was like, Kyle, I don't even like you saying that because an M is one letter away from an F, and I don't want to hear fumbles. Leads the league in mumbles.
Ray's really grown on him.
Ray's good, man.
I like Ray.
Nothing in the baby zone. Austin says, I think A.J. Brown's a horrible matchup for the Niners DBs. You cross that bridge in the conference championship game.
And
there should be bad matchups in the conference championship games against the 1 seeds.
For sure. Who feels like, oh, yeah, we got an A.J. Brown stopper. I'll tell you who's a bad match. Justin Jefferson's a tough matchup the following week, right?
Yeah.
I mean, last time I checked, he's pretty damn
Thielen?
good.
Jefferson and Thielen?
Well, who's Thielen going on? Lenore?
Would you rather play those guys on turf or at home on grass if you're the Niners?
Grass.
Yeah.
I like Cousins I'll take my chances with him coming to me.
This would be a great weather. Like, this weather for Cousins would be ideal for the Niners, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You would like a bomb cyclone for Cousins.
I could just Seattle just kind of mucking up the game, running the ball. They're praying for rain. I think it's a Luke Bryan song. Pete's probably playing it over and over in the facility.
I agree. My thing is like I had a couple people DM me after the show like, well, here's the thing, like why the Niners should kick Seattle's ass after we did the show yesterday. And to me, if you take a step back, you go Niners, Seahawks, Pete Carroll. I just can't assume any of that becomes easy. Now, maybe it does. The Niners blow teams out. The Niners are much better than the Seahawks. That is a fact. But there's a difference between what should happen and saying it's impossible for the thing that shouldn't happen happens.
Agreed.
Appropriate fear. And, pick 262 as your quarterback. Now, I believe in him, but he's never done this before. That is what's kind of cool. I will say, like, you want to play the Packers, you want to play the Lions, Lions would be kind of freaky if you were playing the Lions. Like, I'd love that matchup, but that'd be a freaky game because they're freaky.
I like some good reps from McGlinchey on Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah. There's no such thing as like a soft landing in the playoffs, but one thing that I'm excited about just is we get to watch Brock Purdy in the postseason this week. Like that's an insane thing to think would occur if you had made that statement January 10, 2022.
But isn't that what's fun about football?
Yeah.
And isn't that just fun about sports? Like all of a sudden Nick Foles is winning a Super Bowl. Like this is what makes this whole thing pretty fun. It's just you can't make this shit up. And honestly, more often than not, this situation goes horribly bad. It's what makes it really fun when it goes really well. Because you're like, no, you still can't believe it. You still can't believe it. And honestly, if he goes on to win this week, and let's just get him to the NFC Championship game, we'd go, I can't believe they made the NFC Championship game with Brock Purdy. But then I think Pete Carroll would tell you, guys, have you seen their fucking roster?
Sure.
Right? You seen their coach? Like they're pretty well equipped. They just need the quarterback to play solid. This is what the old school coaches would say. I don't need Mahomes. If you build up your team, Pete's like, this is what I told Russell 8 years ago. Hand the ball off, throw some play action, we'll win. We'll play D. That's the formula. Pete's like, I've been saying this for 30 years. Kyle's like, me too.
Yeah.
I've been saying this since I was 10. So it's just like, it really, but what makes Brock cool is that was Jimmy in the playoff runs. He was kind of steering the ship, but the ship was going with the current. Like he wasn't dodging, icebergs. Yeah. It feels like Purdy is a huge part of this, which makes it very unique. Like it's unheard of. It's unprecedented. It's unprecedented to see, even if you're Mr. Relevant, I would just say 6th, 7th round picks. I would say once you get past like that 4th round, we've seen it before. Cousins, Dak. I'm sure there are other guys in the history of the league, but those two guys now have been to the playoffs a lot over the last like half decade. So it's like, yeah, you can find guys in the middle rounds to be really good. 7th rounders, that doesn't happen.
That's the added element is you're watching him thinking, A, can he help them win the Super Bowl this year? And B, did they just find – because even if
Tony Romo's story is ultimately he's an undrafted free agent, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say the Niners have been terrible up until when Brock Purdy came in. Like they're not a playoff team. Their season's been over for months, weeks at least. There would still, after Brock Purdy did what he did, there'd be this story about it. Did they just find their future quarterback? Right. So just that individual storyline is a pretty powerful storyline. And you put that on top of they're trying to win a championship with this guy.
Well, I'll give you an example. The Miami Dolphins, who somehow made the playoffs. Tua has been in shambles. Their 7th round pick from this season, who went ahead of Brock Purdy, is Skylar Thompson.
Wow.
Who, when I watch Skylar Thompson, I think this guy stinks.
He got it. I wonder if
you
Kyle
told
likes
me
Skylar.
that if Brock Purdy had been on the Miami Dolphins, they would be better off. That's a fact.
A great find too, because of the Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan connection.
They were separated, guy, by 15 selections. I bet both those guys at that point in time probably thinking, I'm just going to be an undrafted free agent. Both of them get drafted, and both of them we'll see with Skylar, but I would guess starting a playoff game. And Skylar Thompson is just not.
He threw 12 touchdowns last year at Kansas State. 12-4. He never threw more than 12 touchdowns in a season. That's insane.
I know. He's bigger, I guess.
He looks bigger.
Did Brock Purdy go to the NFL Combine?
Didn't he? Haven't we gone through some of his measurables? But I don't know. How would he have as a 7th-round pick? I thought we went
Yeah, he
through
did.
some of
He
his
did.
split times and all that. Yeah.
He did. He's actually a little shorter, basically same weight. He's got bigger hands. He's faster. He's obviously way more productive in the same conference than Skylar Thompson. I'd argue that's
one more.
Pick. How could you take Skylar Thompson over Brock Purdy?
You think you see something on film?
That's an overthink.
Yeah. In the 7th round.
What if you found out that the 49ers also had Skylar Thompson above Brock Purdy?
I know.
I could probably find out.
What if you find out Kyle? Yeah.
Well, Kyle claimed, and I heard him talking about this. Can't remember who he was talking with. He's like, obviously, we didn't think we were going to take quarterback. So I'm not going to watch any of the quarterbacks in the draft, right? Last year, Trey's on the team. We didn't have a first-round pick. So John and Peters give him groups of guys to watch at other positions. But it's the draft. We still need to evaluate some quarterbacks. So the scouting staff gives like Greasy and Slowick and some of those guys like 10 quarterbacks to watch. And then they rank their favorite ones. And then from there, Kyle goes, well, I have to do my due diligence because we eventually might get an undrafted free agent. I watch that group of the guys they like. And clearly, like, I liked Brock Purdy, with them. Like, they liked him too. So we kind of came to the consensus of liking him. But it gets filtered down to him because he's not going to watch the 35 quarterbacks that are draft eligible, right? Why waste your time when you already have Sudfeld and Trey on your squad? But this is where I would say that football, unlike the other sports, and most coaches openly talk about this, especially in the NFL, how like you need your staff to be good, scouting and assistants. Like you are so dependent on them. Like, hey, coach, you should watch this guy. Just that simple statement. Coach, I fucking like this guy. I know he's not really on a radar. Check him out. Now, I've been in these meetings. A lot of times that statement is like, oh, this guy stinks. He knows his dad. It's like, oh, he coached with he coached with Matt Campbell or it's like, it's one of those. But sometimes like, damn, we kind of like this guy too. So it's hard because football, unlike, I guess baseball probably a little bit, there's so many names. There's so many names at all these positions. And every once in a while, that dude turns out to be your starting guard for the next decade. Or that dude turns out to be Brock Purdy. Or that guy turns out to be Emmanuel Mosley. That guy turns out to be Juwan Jennings. Now, there's way more guys that turn out to be names that you never hear of. I get ultimately what I'm saying. There's an element of work. There's also an element of luck. And then just kind of meets in the middle and creates a football team.
Right, right.